The Plaguelands, also referred to as the Plagues, and originally called Eastworld, and sometimes including all of the Northlands, that is, the northern parts of Lordaeron, are the region that were most corrupted by the Scourge during the Third War. Sometimes this region included Tirisfal Glades. The Eastworld was a stretch of fertile foothills located east of the Tirisfal Glades. During the Troll Wars, military leaders from Arathor constructed crude forts throughout Eastworld prior to the kingdom's direct confrontation with the Amani Empire around 2800 before the opening of the Dark Portal. After the war, those forts would become populated trading centers from which many modern cities would spring. The settlements built on the east wall, like Light's Hope's Chapel, Stratholme, Anderhall, or Tyr's Hand, were the most important holy sites of the Church of the Holy Light in Lordaeron. The Plaguelands are split in two nowadays: the Eastern Plaguelands, which are the most devastated by the Scourge, and the Western Plaguelands, who still seem to be in a good state. For this part, we'll start with the Eastern Plaguelands. Like the Western Plaguelands, the Eastern Plaguelands were once beautiful and brimming with farms and small villages known collectively as Eastworld. The region government was centered around the city of Stratholme, the second largest city in Lordaeron. Also nearby were the towns of Darrowshire, Corin's Crossing, and Tyr's Hand, and to the east of Stratholme was the pass leading into the southern boundaries of Quel'Thalas. During the Second War, the bordering area with Quel'Thalas saw fighting between the Alliance of Lordaeron and the Old Horde that invaded Quel'Thalas. A small band of orcs broke off from the main invading force and burned the small town of Blackwood to the ground, killing all of its inhabitants in spite of the valorous defenses marshaled by its lord. And that would give us Garithos later on. In the opening hours of the Third War, the investigation into the origins of the Scourge led by Prince Arthas and Jaina Proudmoore throughout the Tirisfal Glades and what is now the Western Plaguelands, more specifically the towns of Anderhall and Heartglen, where they confronted the necromancer Kel'Thuzad and his cult of the Damned. Kel'Thuzad told Arthas to seek out the leader of the Scourge in Lordaeron, the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis at Stratholme. While en route via Heartglen, Arthas and Jaina were joined by Lord Uther, Master of the Silver Hand. When they arrived at Stratholme, Arthas realized that the villagers had been infected with the plague of undead. When Uther refused to obey Arthas' command to purge the city, Arthas relieved Uther of command and disbanded the Silver Hand, then slaughtered the townsfolk himself. After hunting down Mal'Ganis and Northrend, Arthas returned as one of the Lich King's Death Knights and toppled the kingdom of Lordaeron by murdering his own father, King Terenas. After the fall of Lordaeron's capital, the plague spread throughout the northern regions of Lordaeron, turning them into the blighted lands they are today. The resistance against the Scourge was particularly bloody at Darrowshire, where the ghoul Horgus the Ravager and the Death Knight Marduk Blackpool, alias Marduk the Black, led an army of Scourge against the town. Only surviving paladins under Davil Crockford and the Darrowshire militia under Captain Joseph Redpath were able to stand in their way. Though they put up a valiant fight, the defenders of Darrowshire were not enough to stave off the endless legions of the Scourge. Davil managed to defeat Horgus in combat, but he succumbed to the horrific wounds the ghoul had inflicted. Captain Redpath fell to Marduk's necromancy, his soul taken from his body and corrupted into the service of the Scourge, where he proceeded to turn on his fellow and tear Darrowshire apart, killing everyone who hid in their homes. After the fall of Lordaeron, Alexander Smallgreen formed a crusade from the remnants of Lordaeron's Knights of the Silver Hand and attempted to retake the Shattered Kingdom from both the Scourge and the undead renegades known as the Forsaken. In the Eastern Plaguelands, they took control of both the town of Tyr's Hand and the western districts of Stratholme, where they battled the forces of Baron Rivendare to gain control of the destroyed city. After the death of Alexander Smallgreen, the Crusade went through a schism, forming factions such as the Brotherhood of the Light and the Argent Dawn, which established themselves in Light Hope's Chapel, and with those who remained in the original Crusade renaming themselves as the Scarlet Crusade. Jumping further a few years, meanwhile, the Alliance and the Horde continued to fight over the abandoned Lordaeron towers scattered around the Eastern Plaguelands. Eventually, the Master of the Scourge in Lordaeron made his return to the Blighted Lands. From his citadel of Naxxramas, floating over the Plaguewood near Stratholme, he prepared to continue the work he began in the name of his master, the Lich King. The dreaded citadel Naxxramas stood in this region, and with it Kel'Thuzad's reign was enforced and undisputed. With the help of the Argent Dawn, Darion Mograine infiltrated the floating Scourge citadel and tried his luck at bringing it down. He ultimately failed, losing his life in the process. However, he managed to free his father, Alexandros Mograine, formerly the wielder of the Ashbringer, from undeath, finally giving his spirit rest. Without him, the Dark Fortress was left severely weakened, as he was one of the 4 horsemen who led the military forces in Naxxramas. And so, with this in mind, the Argent Dawn led an all-out assault on the fortress and defeated Kel'Thuzad, but failed to actually kill him. The citadel ended up vanishing from the Plaguelands not too long after. Then some weird and strange events would happen. A Crimson Courier would start to roam from Tyr's Hand to Stratholme, which was a very strange sight. This courier was usually escorted by 4 Crimson bodyguards, and sometimes the Scarlet Oracle, Demetria, would be seen alongside 8 Scarlet troops. Prior to the start of the invasion of Outland, the Eastern Plaguelands, like much other places in Azeroth, were invaded by a group of Burning Legion demons. This area was also invaded by the Scourge twice in the years leading to the war against the Lich King. And in that process, Naxxramas started floating again and away from the Plaguelands and reappeared over Dragonflight in Northrend, though it was replaced by another necropolis, and that was Arceus, the Ebon Hold, over the far eastern portion of the zone. From there, Arthas sent his Death Knights to exterminate both the Scarlet Crusade and the Argent Dawn, and leave his grip over the Plaguelands unchallenged. But there is that old saying about the best laid plans of mice and men, and sometimes Lich Kings. The Lich King would unleash his Death Knights, and those would bring ravage to the Scarlet Crusade, and including the towns of New Avalon and Havenshire. Of course, the Scarlet Crusade would make their plan of the Crimson Dawn and leave, and as the influence of the Lich King grew and the Death Knights slaughtered all the living, what followed next was the Battle for Light's Hope Chapel. The Death Knights were led by Darion Mograine, who was now returned as a Death Knight. The battle started, and while the Scourge had the numbers, the defenders of Lighthope's Chapel, though few in number, managed to defeat the undead. Some more actions later, and the Lich King would come, only to be confronted by Tyrion Fordring, who, thanks to Darion's sacrifice and remembrance of his father, would give him the Ashbringer. And that was enough to not defeat the Lich King, but push him back and free the Death Knights from his influence. And then the proper war against the Lich King would start. But let's go back to the Eastern Plaguelands. Since the Cataclysm, the moment Deathwing destroyed good parts of Azeroth, the Argent Crusade has strengthened its presence in the Plaguelands, claiming not only outposts formerly held by the now defunct Argent Dawn, such as Lighthope's Chapel, but also the former Scarlet Crusade town of Heartglen, and the 4 towers throughout the Eastern Plaguelands, around which the plague has receded. They have also joined forces with the Cenarian Circle to help heal the Plaguelands from its plagued state. Despite Monty's treachery, the Brotherhood of Light eventually triumphed over the Scourge in Northrend and have returned to the Eastern Plaguelands. They have begun their own campaign against the remaining Scourge and Risen forces in Lordaeron, attempting to reclaim the cities of Stratholme and Tyr's Hand for the Argent Crusade. Though the Brotherhood and the Crusade are still allied with one another, the Argent Crusade is concerned with the Brotherhood's recklessness and their dislike for the Crusaders' rigid code of ethics. Their campaign concludes with the capture of Tyr's Hand from the undead, but also the capture of the Scarlet Bastion and Alonso's Chapel, now under the control of the Argent Dawn after the death of Balnazar and Lord Arius Rivendare. As a little side note, Balnazar was in fact the Scarlet Leader in disguise, and he basically used his magic to rise the former Scarlet Crusader into the Risen. Moving on. The amount of corruption in the land itself seems to have diminished somewhat, roughly to levels displayed by the Western Plaguelands before the Cataclysm. The plague has been cleansed from Argent Crusade-controlled territories such as Lighthope's Chapel and the Five Towers, and water has started to flow again in its formerly drained riverbeds. Now let's look at the Eastern Plaguelands from the RPG's perspective, because I think the RPG really brings many interesting perspectives and pieces of lore to paint a complete picture of certain zones. The Eastern Plaguelands are dominated by the Scourge, and the Archlich Kel'Thuzad commands the region from the ruined city of Stratholme, the Scourge capital in Lordaeron. Undead roam the land freely, and one might run into a dozen of them upon entering the area. The entirety of the Plaguelands is polluted and wretched, blighted by the Scourge. The undead plague has corrupted the people and nature itself. Noxious orange mist, known as the Poison Mist, floats like living entities over the blackened, filthy soil. The Scourge's power here is absolute, and they undoubtedly hoard vast magical power and potent artifacts in the city. Despite the undead's power, humanity and other forces gather in pockets of resistance. Forest trolls from Zul'Aman in the north battle the Scourge to reclaim their ancient kingdom, and a crazed human group, the Scarlet Crusade, struggles courageously and vainly against the undead. The only safe place in this wretched land is the human city of Tyr's Hand, the Crusaders' base of operations in the region. The Scourge controls the Plaguelands. The undead are intelligent and draw their power from the Lich King far to the north. Now that the Lich King has regained his power, all the Scourge's members are utterly loyal, and it cannot be expected to see more defectors such as Lady Sylvanas and her Forsaken. Cultists, necromancers, zombies, ghouls, skeletal warriors, and worse roam the lands, slaughtering the few survivors when they find them. The undead need no rest and never complain. Against this indomitable force battles the Scarlet Crusade. As the name implies, these humans, warrior and priest, dress in bright reds, a stark contrast to the devastated grey landscape. The Crusaders are frenetic, desperate to destroy the Scourge, but well and truly crazy. The Crusaders are fearless zealots, drawing strength and conviction from the holy light. They are dedicated to eliminating undead and offering protection to human survivors. Unfortunately, the Crusaders tend to think that anyone unassociated with them carries the undead plague and simply kill refugees more often than not. They are well armed and armored and keep their equipment highly polished. Though their hearts are in the right place, their minds are addled. The tiny group is a pathetic force against the Scourge's might. The Scarlet Crusade must be incorporated into a larger army to be successful, and someone has to kick the righteousness out of it. A large forest troll force has moved into this region, striking south from Zul'Aman. These trolls are led by Tresh'jin, and they seek to regain their ancestral kingdom. Forest trolls are no friends to dwarves or humans, but they are enemies of the Scourge. If promised their kingdom, they might join an alliance. Geographical-wise, the Eastern Plaguelands are north of the hinterlands, and east of course, the Western Plaguelands. Darrowmere Lake borders the region on the south, while Zul'Aman and Quel'Thalas lie to the north. The land is blighted, the plants and animals soiled and corrupted. The blight has altered the trees, transforming them into stands of gigantic mushrooms, which are recommended not to eat. Darrowmere Lake provides reasonably fresh water, but the longer the Scourge remains, the fallow the water grows. To the north, the elevation rises towards Quel'Thalas and Zul'Aman. Kel'Thuzad's minions are the only creatures that roam the land freely. Now let's look at some important cities and monuments from this zone, and we'll start with Tyr's Hand, that lies on the coast of Tyr's Bay within the area originally known as the Eastweld. It is one of the oldest and most revered holy sites of the Church of the Light. Because of its religious significance, Tyr's Hand is also known as a city of churches. It is home to both the Scarlet Basilica and the fortified Tyr's Hand Abbey, the latter of which consists of 3 sections: the main hall, the Hall of Arms, and the library wing. It is a heavily fortified city, able to hold its own against the Scourge. Its The most important military structure is, of course, the barracks. It also has its own blacksmith. Now let's begin with its history. After the Troll Wars and King Thoradin's reign of Arothor, many humans expanded the nation, settling in the northern lands of Lordaeron, formerly ruled by the Amani forest trolls. These humans populated the East World some 2,700 years before the opening of the Dark Portal and founded new Arathi settlements. The Church of the Holy Light, with its origins tracing back to the chaos of the Troll Wars, was founded some centuries later in Lordaeron. It became a predominant human religion, and the church constructed temples and shrines throughout the human lands. Among the oldest and most revered of these holy sites were the temples in Eastworld, including Tyr's Hand. During the Second War, troubles arose in Tyr's Hand when the local peasant population fell into a state of minor revolt. The Alliance was forced to fight the rebellious peasants. Eventually, the uprising was quelled, and the Knights of the Silver Hand were summoned to watch over the populace. It was later discovered that the rebellion was started by Alterac spies in hopes of concealing the Orcish mining facility located in the region. Eventually, the Horde used Ogre Magi to attack the area, establishing a fortress on an island at the mouth of Tyr's Bay, hoping to cut off the Alliance supply lines into Quel'Thalas. The city suffered heavy damage as the Orcs razed the bayside area. During the Third War, as Eastworld was captured by the Scourge and turned into the Plaguelands, Tyr's Hand held on. Under the rule of Lord Valdemar, the fortified city withstood almost daily attacks by the undead. Eventually, it allied itself with the Knights of the Silver Hand. The Knights extended their protection to the city while also hoping to recruit additional personnel from there. As the Order of the Silver Hand splintered, the city allied itself with the Scarlet Crusade. The city was then still controlled by Crusader Lord Valdemar and the Scarlet Crusade, holding out against the Scourge dominating the eastern Plaguelands. It sent supplies and reinforcements to other Scarlet locations. Daily reports were sent here from Strahome via heavily escorted couriers who had to fight their way through the Plaguelands. Prominent Scarlet Crusade members here included High General Bridget Bendis as well as the Scarlet Oracle Demetria. The latter was eventually lured out of the city by Horde adventurers and ambushed on her way towards Stratholme. Blood Knights were sent here to steal a vial of the Abbey's holy water in their quest to attain the Thalassian Charger. The city managed to survive many Scourge attacks thanks to their use of the holy artifact Light's Wrath that helped them defeat the Scourge at every point. Later on, Tyr's Hand was the center of the holdout area known as the Scarlet Enclave, also encompassing Havenshire and New Avalon. As we all know, the area came under attack by the Scourge necropolis Arceus, the Ebon Hold. Although High General Bridget Bendis initially organized resistance, and a relief force from Harglen and Tirsfall was sent towards the city. Bendis was eventually influenced by the false vision of the light and the Scourge deception to abandon the area. She sailed away with some of her followers to Northrend, forming the Scarlet Onslaught. The relief army, led by Galavar Pureblood, was decisively defeated by the Lich King and his Death Knights. Although most of the Scarlet Enclave was ruined by the Scourge, Tyr's Hand endured under the leadership of Lord Valdemar. Among the survivors was the High General's daughter, Linia. Eventually, the Death Knights would break free of the Lich King's control, and they would move the fight to Northrend. And then, during the Cataclysm, as one of the last human holdouts in the area, the city was eventually able to collect many of the relics of Lordaeron. These included the Shroud of Uther, Galivard's Sigil, and others, which were mostly kept within the barracks. Every crusader within the city, at some point, was turned into undeath, presumably due to the machinations of the Dread Lord Balnazar, posing as the Grand Crusader Datrohan. As a result, the Brotherhood of the Light sent an assault force of 100 men to the area. Aided by some adventurers, the Brotherhood was able to capture the city and eliminate the Scarlet leadership, including the then undead Valdemar himself. With this, the Scarlet Crusade definitely lost its hold over the city, which came under the control of the Brotherhood of the Light. And now let's look at the RPG, of course. Tyr's Hand serves as the Scarlet Crusade's main base of operation. The city is manned by an army of Scarlet Crusaders and is untouched by the undead plague. Located in the southern Plaguelands, Tyr's Hand is the only human settlement left in this part of Lordaeron. In the city's center is the newly erected Scarlet Monastery, a grand edifice that rivals Stormwind's Cathedral of Light. General Abendis commands the city and its crusaders and priests. The few humans who roam the Plaguelands desperately seek the safety of Tyr's Hand. Tyr's Hand is very near to the border of the hinterlands, which may help explain why the city remains relatively safe. Next, let's look at a part of the zone, a special place that I kinda like, that is not really connected to the Kingdom of Lordaeron, but it kinda is, and that's Quel'Ithien Lodge, a high elven hunting lodge near the entrance to Quel'Thalas. And it was one of the two major concentrations of high elves in Lordaeron. Quel'Ithien Lodge was once a commonly visited Farstrider camp. Lortimer Terran spent some time here and recalls being greeted warmly by his compatriots at the lodge during his visits. It housed a number of elven documents, even some pertaining to the royal family and the Ranger General of Silvermoon. The lodge fell on hard times following the Scourge invasion of Quel'Thalas. It was here that the banished rangers under Renthar Hawkspear took up residence after Grand Magister Romat returned from Outland. Renthar and his group had dissented against Romat's teachings on moral grounds. Then, to avoid the nation becoming divided on the issue, as the teachings had been an essential boon to the elves, Lortimer, now Quel'Thalas' regent, exiled the group south. The priestess Aurora Skycaller was among the exiles. From then on, the lodge served as their home. Quel'Ithien eventually came under attack from Horde agents on behalf of Nathanos Blightcaller, who killed a number of rangers at the lodge and took the Quel'Thalas registry. Much happened in Quel'Thalas in the years that followed, of which the lodge remained unaware. Lortimer, now the sole leader of the kingdom of Quel'Thalas, made the final journey to the lodge. He informed the exiles of the recent events that had transpired, telling the tale of Kelta's Sunstrider's downfall and the restoration of the Sunwell. With the Ghostlands in a safer state, the regent offered Renthar and his company regular aid and supplies. However, Renthar was outraged, outright refused to accept any aid, and threatened to kill anyone Lortimer might send bearing it. The regent mourned for the losses the lodge had incurred, but in his heart could not fault the exiles for their anger. He left the lodge feeling only sorrow. During the events of Cataclysm, all the elves at the lodge became wretched after the Ranger Lord Hawkspear found an item of seductive energy. Kirkan Dawnshield and Hawkspear himself were two of the only known residents to escape their fate. It was later revealed that Chris Goldenlight was also alive and well, having found her way to the seat of knowledge in Pandaria. While Dawnshield chose to seek out personal assistance for putting his family out of their misery from any who would listen at the base of the nearby Norpass Tower, the former Ranger Lord, now known as Death Hunter, kneels at the side of the Argent Crusader's corpse burning pit down below, looking off at his former home in the distance. While Hawkspear is now apparently focused on destroying the undead and waits for people to ask him to ally himself with them for that purpose, none have yet to appear to have made such an offer. And that is a tragic story of some of Lordaeron's high elves. But now let's move on to even tragicer details, with the city of Stratholme. Now, of course, the city of Stratholme was founded during the Arotar Empire, and in the days that followed its foundation and acceptance into the kingdom of Lordaeron, the city thrived, and it was well known for producing holy water capable of cleansing even the darkest magics. Stratholme was the second largest city within the kingdom of Lordaeron, matched only by the capital. At the beginning of the Second War, Stratholme, specifically Alonsus Chapel, was the location where the Archbishop Alonsus Fowl founded the Holy Order of the Knights of the Silver Hand and inducted its first 5 members, including Uther the Lightbringer and Seidan Daitrohan. Prior to the burning of Quel'Thalas, Turalion, Allyria Windrunner, Khadgar, and their army disembarked near Stratholme and went to Quel'Thalas. During the Second War, renegade Alterac soldiers and sailors were brought here to be restrained until they could be escorted to the capital city for interrogation. Stratholme was also an important port town and the chief source of Alliance oil in the north. While the city was preparing to deliver massive amounts of oil to the kingdoms in western Lordaeron, the Horde sabotaged its refineries and oil platforms to halt the shipment and then destroyed the city. With the destruction of Stratholme, the Alliance supply lines to Quel'Thalas were severed. The city was also where one of the original paladins, Tirion Fordring, was tried for treason against the Alliance for defending the orc Ettrig in the Hall of Justice. The trial was conducted by Uther the Lightbringer himself and overseen by various leaders of the Alliance. Tirion was found guilty, stripped of his powers, and was exiled from the Alliance lands. The following day, the city came under attack by a small but well-trained band of orcs under the command of the young warchief Thrall, determined to save Ettrig. Amidst the chaos, Tirion and Ettrig escaped into the countryside. And now, for the time, the tale turns really tragic. Just before the Third War, the plague of undead sweeping over Lordaeron reached Stratholme and infected shipments of grain from Anderhall. The populace, unaware of the plague, baked and consumed the infected grain, unknowingly sealing their fate. The Dreadlord Mal'Ganis has chosen Stratholme for some specific reasons. It was heavily populated and was Eastweald's most important city, strategically and economically. It was also a holy site, being the Silverhand Paladin's Order's birthplace. If Stratholme fell to the plague and became an undead stronghold, Lordaeron would lose their control of the Eastweald. Soon after, as the first undead started to rise, Prince Arthas, Uther the Lightbringer, Jaina Proudmoore, and a contingent of soldiers arrived at Stratholme, but soon realized the city had already been infected. Arthas believed that the only way to prevent Stratholme from becoming a bastion of the Scourge was to purge the city, and so the prince ordered his comrades to kill the plagued, but not yet turned citizens. For Arthas, this was as much an act of mercy as it was a strategic decision. If the populace of Stratholme knew they were about to turn into undead monsters that would attack everyone they loved, what would they prefer? Arthas knew if he contacted the plague, he would rather die a clean death as a free-willed human than a mindless walking corpse. Most of the soldiers and allies, including Jaina and Uther and his paladins, chose not to help Arthas. Thinking his purge was madness. The prince and some soldiers, however, went on. Fire engulfed the city while ash and ember billowed through the streets. Screams were heard and the blood of innocents ran thick along the cobblestones. Almost the entirety of Stratholme's population was massacred by then, along with the undead. Amidst the chaos, Arthas confronted Mal'Ganis, but the Dreadlord told him to seek him out in Northrend, fleeing from the site. With that, Arthas gathered his forces, leaving the city while fire swept over Stratholme's ruins. Days later, Jaina and Uther returned. To their shock, it was even worse than they expected, as bodies littered the streets and much of the city was burned to a husk. At some point, the undead scourge swept through Stratholme, and the Knights of the Silver Hand manufactured holy water to use against the invaders. They stored it inside small crates along with other vital supplies and distributed them throughout the city. Unfortunately, the citizens turned into scourge reinforcements before the supplies could ever be used, and the city fell under the control of the scourge. At some point, the human Ras Frostwhisper arrived to Stratholme and pledged his soul to the Lich King, being raised as a lich. Once the scourging of Lordaeron had ended, after the Death Knight Arthas had been called back to Northrend, the Lich Kil'Thuzad became the leader of the undead in the city and positioned his floating fortress, the necropolis Naxxramas, above the plagued forest near the ruined city. After the Third War, the ever-burning city was invaded by the remains of the Knights of the Silver Hand. The group consisted of Brigitte Abendis, Alexandros Mulgrain, his sons Darion and Renault, as well as Saidan Daytrohan and Talion Fordring. Feeling as if they were in a maze, they were soon ambushed by the undead. During the battle, Darion was hit by a dark magic, and Saidan was separated from the rest of the knights, only to be killed by the Natrazim Balnazar, who subsequently possessed his body in order to pose as the Lord Commander. Soon the paladins regrouped and escaped the city. Later, Renault, under the guidance of Saidan, tricked Alexandros and Fairbanks into sending them to Stratholme to rescue Darion from danger. The two charged for the bridge leading to Stratholme, but soon became trapped by the scourge coming from the city as well as from the opposing side. Later, after Sylvanas freed Forsaken, she freed Nathanos Blightcaller. The Ranger Lord hunted Ramstein the Gorger in the Plaguelands, but it fled to Stratholme. Antion Harmon, in search of his wife, attempted to enter the city, but was killed by the undead. Stratholme was the largest stronghold held by the Scourge in all of Lordaeron. Leading the undead forces in the city was a former noble turned Death Knight by the name of Baron Titus Rivendare, who coordinated the efforts of the Lich King in the Plaguelands, where he constantly battled the forces of the Scarlet Crusade and the Argent Dawn. However, one small area on Stratholme remained under the control of the living, the Scarlet Bastion, from where the Grand Crusader Saidan Datrohan himself led the crusade against the Scourge. However, the Crusaders' fanaticism led them to believe that any who were not members were corrupted by the undead and had to be destroyed. As a result, the Argent Dawn sent adventurers to kill the Grand Crusader. To their surprise, though, they discovered that the Grand Crusader had, in fact, been dead for years, having been impersonated by the Dreadlord Balnazzar. They eventually overcome the demon, however, leaving the remnants of the Scarlet Crusade to deal with the Scourge alone. After Balnazzar's defeat, he killed the Crusaders and brought them back as the Risen. Lord Rivendell would move to Naxxramas to replace Alexandros Mograine, and his place would be taken by his son, the fallen paladin Arius Rivendare. Crusade Commander Aegor Dawnbringer, Master Craftsman Wilhelm, Packmaster Stonebruiser, Crusader Commander Corfax, and the Archmage Angela dos Santos from the Brotherhood of the Light offered rewards to adventurers to help them end these menace. After killing both leaders, the Argent Crusade attacked the remaining undead and took control of the ruined city, making Alonso's Chapel and the Scarlet Bastion their new bases, though only for a time, as the undead still roamed the streets freely. During the Burning Legion's third invasion, the city was invaded by the Knights of the Ebon Hold, ironically, in order to retrieve the saddle of Death Charger's reins. The Death Knights fought against a patchwork horror and a ghost named Vivian's Lament. Then the reformed Knights of the Silver Hand and their High Lord traveled to Stratholme for the city's holy water in order to purify Arius Rivendare's mount, Shadowmane, which was then in the hands of the Death Knight Ramian the Soul Taker, who wanted to spread the plague once more, in order to create the glowing reins of the Golden Charger. They took control of Elder Square from East Wall Gate service entrance, clearing the area of any undead present, and used Alonso's Chapel as a base of operation in the Dead City. The remaining Scourge members and Ramian were killed, and the Silver Hand resolved to keep a closer eye on Stratholme. During the Fourth War, the Scourge activity increased in the ruined city, and the Argent Crusade detected a new threat. Sean Wilkers and some adventurers worked on clearing the Scourge out of the Stratholme service entrance. They were successful, but they also found two shadowy figures in the slaughterhouse who used necromantic magic on Brightmane and escaped. Following the Fourth War, Matthias Shaw reported that for a dead city, there are still living people inside who manage to survive as they can. Most probably the Argent Crusade and the Silver Hand, who continue to control and protect parts of the city, respectively the Scarlet Bastion in Crusader's Square and Alonso's Chapel in the Elder Square. Finally, let's talk about the most important site in the Eastern Plaguelands, Light Hope Chapel. There was not much happening with Light Hope's Chapel during the First and Second War, and as we know, this is an important site for the Region of the Light. So let's start with the most important moment, the Third War. After Arthas' rampage through Lordaeron, Lord Maxwell Tyrosus and a few others were chosen for the secret task of unearthing the bodies of 1,000 fallen heroes of the light and bringing them to Light's Hope Chapel. It is there they were interred once more in the sacred ground. This was done to protect the honored dead from being raised as nothing more than cogs in the Lich King's undead army. And one of them was Kilor, the father of Tarisian. Following Alexandros Mograine's death, some paladins separated themselves from what would become the Scarlet Crusade and formed the Argent Dawn. After leaving Tirisfal Glades, they went deep into the Eastern Plaguelands and made the Light's Hope Chapel their main base of operations. As a new faction, they allowed all races to join, even members of the Horde. From there, they would fight the undead their own way, even sending most recruits to Stratholme. Lord Raymond George was the first leader, but when he died, Lord Maxwell Tyrosus took his place. Sometime after Alexandros Mograine was turned into a Death Knight, the Lich Kil'Thuzad led a Scourge assault against Light's Hope's Chapel, where the Argent Dawn was greatly outnumbered. The battle for Light's Hope Chapel was a desperate last stand, because if the Argent Dawn failed, the Scourge would claim the consecrated ground and all righteous souls who had been laid to rest there. At some point during the battle, Tyrion Fordring arrived and joined the Argent Dawn's forces to turn the tide of the battle, and so it turned in the chapel's defenders' favor, until Darion Mograine ran the Ashbringer to his own chest as a final act of faith and love to free his father's soul. Alongside Alexandros Mograine, the spirits of the 1,000 heroes interred below the chapel also awakened and brought forth a reckoning against the Scourge Den, decimating the undead with their vengeful fury. Unfortunately, while Light's Hope Chapel was saved, many had fallen, and some were recovered by the Scourge. Among them, the corpse of Darion Mograine and the Ashbringer fell into the hands of Kel'Thuzad, who made him the High Lord of the Death Knights of Arceus. Years later, Light's Hope Chapel still served as headquarters for the Argent Dawn in the Plaguelands. The Siege of the Sanguinine was an attack on Light Hope's chapel by a large army of undead Scourge led by Kiriksen the Zealous. Fortunately, the attack was quickly repelled, and Kiriksen suffered an incurable wound from Lord Maxwell Tyrosus that made Kiriksen unable to serve the Scourge in corporal form. At some point, Tyrion Fordring and some of his reformed Knights of the Silver Hand joined the chapel. Even though they officially detached themselves from the Scarlet Crusade, the Argent Dawn still allowed negotiations. They used the chapel as their meeting point with the Brotherhood of the Light and the Scarlet Crusade during the Scourge invasion heralded by Naxxramas. Years later, Arthas Menethil became the Lich King and entered deep slumber. When he awoke, he rallied his troops and prepared them for a campaign in the eastern Plaguelands in order to raise powerful soldiers for the Scourge from underneath Light Hope's chapel. Of course, this is the whole story with the Death Knights and how Tyrion defeated the Lich King in that moment only to free the Death Knights and declare war against the Lich King, forming the Argent Crusade, and then the Death Knights forming the Knights of the Ebon Hold. Moving on, following the death of the Lich King, the Argent Crusade began to rebuild and fortify the area, turning it into a beacon of light in the otherwise eternal gloom of the eastern Plaguelands. The Crusaders also constructed a statue dedicated to their High Lord, Tyrion Fordring. After the Cataclysm, the Argent Crusade continued to recruit heavily to their cause, as prospective members must complete a trial in the chapel cemetery to join their ranks, which involves defeating the spirit of the former leader of the Argent Dawn, Lord Raymond George. During the third invasion of the Burning Legion, the Sanctum of Light beneath Light's Hope Chapel became the headquarters for the restored Order of the Silver Hand, accessible by a trapdoor in the floor of the chapel itself. The Silver Hand's ongoing offensive within the Broken Shore had drawn the interest of many paladins who wished to fight under the leadership of the new High Lord. The High Lord judged the new recruits themselves and revealed that the chapel grounds were infiltrated by the Natrazim Volzarak the Deceiver, who had disguised himself as one of the recruits. At some point during the invasion, the chapel was once again invaded by the Knights of the Ebon Blade. The Deathlord raised undead from the chapel's crypts and sent it to attack the Argent sentries, while Darion and his 3 horsemen entered the chapel, captured Tyrosus, and entered the Sanctum of the Light. But Lighthouse Chapel did not agree with this, and the Deathlord and his horsemen were banished by its fury. The priest champion of the Conclave also visited the chapel in order to get pure light. There they killed Plaguemonger Pustulus and Blighthounds. And finally, following the Fourth War, Matthias Shaw mentioned in his reports that Light's Hope Chapel still serves as a beacon for travelers in the region, and that the Knights of the Silver Hand continue to meet in the Sanctum of Light beneath the chapel. And these have been the Eastern Plaguelands. Please, if you reach this far, like, comment and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. Thank you.
For years, tensions between the Alliance and the Horde have mounted as worldwide conflicts threaten to plunge the 2 factions into all-out war. Now, the Alliance has begun to tighten the noose, and whoever controls the towers in Eastern Plaguelands controls the tide of battle. Warcraft. The battle has just begun.
If your idea of a vacation spot involves ghosts and ghouls, you're a WoW player who's ready for the Eastern Plaguelands. Enter the Eastern Plaguelands, a once thriving region now swallowed by decay and dread. Here, every step crunches on the bones of the fallen, and the air is thick with the whispers of lost souls. Travel through the desolate towns of Corrin's Crossing and Darrowshire, where echoes of past battles still reverberate. Feel the chill at Light's Hope Chapel, the last bastion of light in this forsaken land. From the undead-infested ruins to the eerie silence of the Plaguewood, the Eastern Plaguelands is a journey into the heart of WoW's darkest lore. Are you brave enough to uncover its secrets? Adventure awaits. See you in Azeroth. You in